Chapter 4 of Letters from Mrs Palmerston to her Daughter, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Anne Fletcher. Chapter 4. Beauty and Ugliness, or the Sick Child. My dear Eliza, the other day, when Mrs Maitland and her daughter left us, you remarked, in a tone of pity and much goodwill, how sorry you were to see Miss Maitland so much altered for the worse in her person. "I think," added you, "she is one of the plainest girls I ever saw. Do you not think her unfortunate with respect to her outward appearance? I'm afraid she will be very crooked." I replied that I had not perceived any ground for that fear, and, what was more, dissented from your general opinion relative to her person. Although I allowed that she had neither regularity of features nor a good complexion, yet I maintained that her countenance had in it an animation and a character extremely prepossessing, and which perfectly agreed with the accounts I had heard of her amiable temper and good sense, and that it would not surprise me to see her at 18 pleasing in regard to her person, and the accomplished young woman Mrs Maitland was so amply qualified to render her. Whilst waiting for your reply, I saw you absorbed in contemplating an image reflected from a mirror opposite to you, and which, to say the truth, exhibited more of the graces of nature than the face or person of Miss Maitland. Your music-master interrupted your reverie, and prevented my comments on the subject of it. And yet, my child, the reflections it awakened in my mind were not less important and serious than yours were flattering and complacent. We will now examine the ground on which rest our opposite sentiments, and inquire into the reasons which have lessened my admiration of a beautiful person. Amongst others, I can produce one which will diminish the value of this prerogative even in your estimation, for I will prove to you that the woman whom above all others you think charming and call fascinating is one of the plainest in person and features of any who visit me. What think you of your favourite and dear Mrs Beaumont? Have you ever critically examined the defects of her shape, or remarked her sallow complexion, unaided as it is but by her fine, intelligent black eyes? Has the irregularity of her features never drawn from you the pity and compassion Miss Maitland excited so powerfully in your mind? I see your surprise, and the dissent of your judgment from mine, for you do not think Mrs Beaumont is an ugly woman, though not a beautiful one, and you cannot admit that this lady answers to my description. But be assured, no one who looks at Mrs Beaumont with attention will deny the resemblance, and by strangers she is constantly regarded as a very plain woman. You have lived in the habit of seeing her every day. She has, by her winning sweetness and cheerfulness, gained your heart. She has imposed upon you, Eliza, as she does on all who know her, for she exhibits virtue and the graces, and by these subdues all hearts and enchants all eyes. You have seen Miss Maitland only once during the last 2 years. When you have seen and conversed with her for 2 or 3 months, we will decide on her defects and pretensions. We will next turn our eyes on an acknowledged beauty. What do you think of Mrs Watkins? I cannot now be mistaken in my example, for you have not forgotten the impression she made on you last year when she entered my drawing-room as a bride. The circle was large, and every one rose to receive the celebrated beauty. All eyes gazed on her with delight, and yours were of the number. Curiosity and admiration suspended for a time the considerations of politeness, and each gentleman forgot that in this tribute to her charms he might wound her delicacy and offend her good sense. She has since that time been a frequent visitor here, and with the same society. She is, if it be possible, more beautiful, and yet we are all quiet when she enters, and at our ease when she departs. To what cause is it owing that Mrs. Watkins has now so few occasions of censuring that admiration once so distressing and embarrassing to her modesty? Shall I tell you, or will you tell me? We have seen her as often as we wish. You keep your station at Mrs. Beaumont's elbow, and I content myself with arranging her card-table as soon as possible. We have gratified our curiosity. We are weary of looking, and seek amusement elsewhere. But be not deceived. It is not altogether to the cold insipidity of this lady that you are to attribute this effect. There is another cause which acts independently of this, and which never fails to weaken the impressions of beauty as well as of deformity. All that is familiar to the senses ceases to be the object of admiration or disgust. And for this reason is it that we are so often the dupes of novelty and the slaves of whim and fashion. Let us then consider Mrs. Watkins as merely a beautiful object. Under this point of view she resembles a fine painting, which every one approaches with curiosity and pleasure. A few examinations of it gratify the one and lessen the other, but it still obtrudes, and we begin to assume the province of critics, perhaps with the sole view of repaying to our self-love that homage it had been surprised into in favour of another. Be that as it may, the piece is now judged defective. It wants colouring, it is overcharged, and the contour is stiff and unnatural. These censures have their day, and in a little time even this interest sinks. We neither look at it nor talk of it, and it is equally forgotten with our family portraits, consigned to an apartment which we never enter. Mrs. Beaumont has none of the attractions of beauty. Her person is as defective as her face. She neither excites emotion nor calls forth any curiosity. The eye of the stranger passes in an instant in search of a more pleasing object. Chance places him near her. He is struck with the sound of a voice harmonized by nature, and expressing in correspondent tones the quick and varied ideas of a lively and correct imagination. He listens to her language. He hears the sprightly sallies of her wit, chastened by modesty and checked by good nature. He draws nearer, and finds himself mixed with the grave and the gay, with the young and the old, whom she has attracted around her. And forgetting his first impressions, he is only solicitous concerning his future admission to a place which merit embellishes, and in which his taste will be gratified. I do not think Mrs. Beaumont would gain a single advantage by having the shape and face of a Mrs. Watkins. The ascendancy she now has over our understandings and our hearts would be rather weakened than increased by her being beautiful. We might suspect that we were deceived by our senses rather than subdued by a merit which reflects honour on those who are capable of appreciating its worth. I believe I've never informed you of the circumstances which first connected me with this amiable woman, whose friendship I regard as one of the peculiar blessings of my life, and whose partiality I account as the most flattering distinction of my fortune. I accompanied my mother 2 or 3 years before I married to Matlock. As you saw this beautiful spot last summer on your way to Buxton, I shall forbear to say any more of it than that your grandmother, like yourself, preferred the house called the Temple to the one below it called the Hall. We accordingly had our apartments there. The declining state of my mother's health rendered this more quiet abode necessary, but by no means excluded in her indulgent consideration of me the amusements of the general rendezvous. We dined in the public room, frequently took our tea there, and returned to the Temple in the evening. It happened, soon after our arrival, that I found placed at my side a little girl whom I had not seen before. She was short and clumsy, ill-dressed, and wore a large straw bonnet which almost concealed her face. This, however, I observed, was pale and sickly, and she had an inflammation in her eyes which demanded the precautions adopted. She appeared intimidated and even distressed by the novelty of her situation, and I was naturally led to look for the party under whose protection she was, and by whom she was so apparently neglected. A lady opposite to me soon gave me the information I searched, by saying aloud, "Nancy, take care you do not eat too much." This precaution I thought as harsh as it was useless, for poor Nancy had not swallowed one morsel, and was only on the point of tasting some bread pudding, which I had recommended and encouraged her to take on her plate. She looked dismayed, hung down her head still lower, and crossed her knife and fork. Unable to divert a confusion that touched me, I turned my attention to the cause of it. A very gay and handsome woman, who, as I suspected, was the mother of poor Nancy, was so deeply engaged by a military beau on the one hand and a young lady on the other, as to have no time to observe the confusion and embarrassment of her daughter, or to repeat an injunction which appeared to arise from habit rather than tender attention. Day after day Nancy and myself kept our stations. We became sociable, and I was pleased with my new acquaintance. The mother had learned our name. She made me some little compliment on my attentions to her daughter, and added she had reason to believe that Nancy's aunt was of the number of Mrs. Woodley's intimate friends. She was not mistaken. The lady in question, Mrs. Johnson, having been long one whom my mother particularly esteemed. She was a single woman, and very rich. Her nephew, the father of Nancy, had offended her by his marriage, and little intercourse had subsisted between him and his good aunt from that period. The connection, however, produced something like acquaintance between his lady and ourselves, and she availed herself of it, and my growing kindness for her neglected child, to beg I would attend to what she ate at table, saying she was just recovered from the measles, that the disorder had left an inflammation in her eyes, which had been extremely alarming, and which still required much caution and care, and that Nancy was very inattentive. I listened with disgust to cautions and cares thus recommended by a mother who was capable of employing the agency of another in her own duty, but I was not unmindful of my charge. My gentle and good mother shared these sentiments with me, and by the numberless proofs of her regard and kindness won the poor child's gratitude and banished her bashful, constrained behaviour. She followed us like our shadow, and appeared to look up to us for her enjoyments. I soon thought there was some reason for the caution respecting Nancy's eating, and as the mother had thought proper to devolve this care on me, I was doubly attentive, judging it of importance to her general health, and peculiarly necessary for her eyes, which remained still in a bad state. From the avidity with which my young friend asked for tongue, slices of cold ham, tarts, etc., etc., as well as the dispatch with which they disappeared, I began to suspect that she pocketed them in order to regale herself in secret, knowing that her mother did not allow her to eat any supper. On one of these occasions I whispered in her ear that chicken was better for her than ham or pastry, placing the wing of a fowl on her plate. She received my admonition with perfect good humour, and began to eat what was before her. At that instant a servant whom she had commissioned brought her the ham. In passing it he slightly touched my shoulder. I turned, and saw Nancy with great adroitness convey it to her lap. The self-command she assumed convinced me it was done with design, and I was persuaded that this child indemnified herself for her remarkable moderation at the table by being a glutton in private. I consequently became vigilant for a day or two, not willing to distress her by my remonstrances without necessity. I found that she constantly preferred cold things, little tarts, cheesecakes, in a word, whatever was easiest to conceal in her handkerchief, and that after dinner she disappeared for some time. There was a mystery in all this which I could not unfold. Chance, however, effected what my ingenuity could not. My mother met at the Hall a family we were acquainted with. They were on their road to Buxton, and meant only to pass a day or two at Matlock. They induced us to pass the day at the Hall, and after dinner my mother and her friends made a party at whist, and I went to the Temple for my work-bag. The day was extremely sultry, and I slowly sauntered to the house. Before me I saw Nancy running with the utmost speed. She ascended a narrow path in the rock, and I lost sight of her. On entering my room I went to the window, which I knew must command the road she had taken, and again I saw the fugitive panting and pressing forward. She had a small covered basket on her arm, which she was obliged to place on the ground from time to time in order to secure her feet. I immediately conceived she had reasons for choosing this perilous and fatiguing road in preference to one easier and shorter by the Temple, and I was certain of meeting her by pursuing it. I forgot in an instant the heat by which I had been oppressed, and set out. Again I caught a glance of her, and again I lost sight of her, but still followed the chase, and turning into a beaten path which communicated with the high road, I saw her before me. But judge of my astonishment when I relate her situation and employment. She was on her knees before a sick, squalid, and shocking-looking child of her own age, who was sitting in an old wicker chair by the door of a half-fallen cottage. She appeared helpless. Her face bore the recent ravages of the smallpox, and she was blind. I stopped a few paces from them. Nancy's bonnet was hanging at her back, and held there by the ribbon which tied it. Her face and eyes were exposed to the vivid rays of the western sun, while she, unmindful of all, was catering from the basket the dainties with which she fed the poor girl, who, to say the truth, devoured them with the avidity of one half-famished. "I am glad," said Nancy, rising at length from her uneasy posture, and wiping with her frock the scalding tears that ran from the girl's eyes, "I am rejoiced that you have had enough to-day. I hope you will not want anything now till your mother returns. But give me the jug, and I'll fetch you some water, and then run home." She turned and saw me. Some apples she held in her hand fell to the ground, and she stood mute and confounded before me. "Wherefore are you here, my love, alone?" demanded I with mildness, "and why so forgetful of your own eyes?" placing the useless bonnet on her head. "Oh," cried she, bursting into tears, "do not tell my mamma. She'll never forgive me. You shall know all. Only let me speak 5 words to this poor girl. She's not to blame. Indeed, it's all my own fault. Let me only comfort her once more, and then I'll go home with you, and you shall know everything." She turned to the frightened child. "Do not be afraid," sobbed she. "It's only Miss Woodley. She wouldn't harm a worm. But I cannot come any more. You will die with hunger, and I cannot help it." She hung on the girl's neck and wept bitterly. I soothed her and quieted the clamours of the child by promising her that she should not be neglected, and we took the road to the Temple. I dispatched a servant with a note to my mother, and gave notice to Mrs. Seymour that Nancy would pass the evening with me, that we had imprudently walked and had both gotten the headache. Nancy soon entered upon her story and her justification. "You shall hear everything, my dear Angelica," said she, fondly embracing me, "for you're the only friend I have, and the only one who would love and pity such a girl as I am." "In the name of wonder," exclaimed I, not comprehending her meaning, "what is it that you've been guilty of?" "Why," answered she, "it's now more than 3 weeks since my mamma went with a party to see Chatsworth. Major O'Brien drove her in his phaeton. My mamma thought the dust and light would hurt my eyes, so she didn't take me. As soon as the party had left the hall, Hollins, our maid, began to scold me. She said I was always in everyone's way, and that but for me she could have gone on the water with her acquaintance. I cried, and told her I was very sorry for her disappointment, but that I couldn't help it. "No," replied she, somewhat kinder, "I know that, but some other people could." and she muttered something I didn't understand about my mamma and her being ashamed of me, adding if I was not so handsome as some people I was better tempered, and she was sure that I would oblige her. "Most willingly," I replied, pleased to see her good-humoured. "Well then, my dear Miss Nancy," said she, "you must stay in this room all the day and lock yourself in. My friends are waiting for me at Cromford. I'll fetch you something very nice for your dinner and lend you my fairy tales to read, but you mustn't stir till I return, nor ever tell your mamma." I promised to be faithful, and she left me in haste, not, however, before she'd provided me with all that I might want. I read till the last dinner bell sounded, but my eyes watered and smarted, and I amused myself with observing the company enter the house. The thought then came into my head that I should like to eat my dinner in the wood. Hollins had left it in this very basket, and I took it in my hand and stole to the wood, but recollecting that the ladies and gentlemen often came thither to walk after dinner, I was afraid of being seen, and instantly quitting it, took by chance this road, and to be more concealed, the path which conducted you to the cottage. The sick child was sitting at the door, as you found her, and I thought she looked as if she had no one to love her or to pity her, so I asked her whether she would like some fruit, offering her that I had in my basket. But, my dear Angelica, she was, as you saw, blind, and more unfortunate than myself. Besides that, one of her poor hands is shrunk and useless from her having fallen into the fire. She was hungry and dry, and told me that her parents left her every day to work at some lead mines 3 miles from home, and that she had nothing to eat till they returned. I gave her," continued the amiable creature, "all my dinner. Oh, my dear Miss Woodley, had you seen her eat it, your gentle heart would have melted. She devoured it like a hungry dog. You do not blame me, do you?" said she, looking anxiously in my face. But I promised to come to her as often as I could, and to bring her food. Fortunately, I regained my room unobserved. Hollins returned before my mamma, and my secret is known only to you. I did not dare to mention my poor starving girl. The next morning, seeing the ladies and gentlemen giving whole buttered muffins to their dogs, with slices of ham and other dainties, I thought of the sick girl, and resolved to take in my turn a little from the dinner to feed her. My mamma always plays at cards till the evening is cool, and Hollins stays whole hours in the servants' hall, and during that time I run to the cottage by a nearer road than the one you came, and I've never been found out, for the walks are always empty." "Oh, but," said I gravely, "has it never occurred to you that you were giving what was not yours to give? Evil is not to be committed even for a good purpose." "Oh, yes," answered she, "I well knew where you would begin to chide, for I knew that was wrong. But what could I do? She was not a dog. I was not then so much in your favour as I have been since. Besides, I was afraid you would not let me run so far in the heat of the day and in the sunshine." "What could I do?" repeated she sorrowfully. "I always spared her all the nice things I could have eaten myself, and was it not hard for this poor ugly child to want food? No one notices her. You saw how frightful her face is, and ugly children, you know—" She paused, and then sobbed, "are not loved." Her tears flowed, and she stopped again. "How has it happened, my dear Miss Angelica," resumed she, fondly caressing me, "that you, who are so beautiful and so admired here, have never reproached me for being so very, very clumsy and disagreeable? I would give anything in the world to be as pretty as my brothers, for then mamma would love me as much as she does them. But what can I do? I can't help being ugly, you know." She could not proceed. I saw with unequivocal indignation the sorrow which the cruelty and folly of her mother had planted in her innocent bosom, and with fervour yielding to my compassion, I said, embracing her tenderly, You are more lovely and more beautiful in your work of mercy than the most finished form or fairest face could render you. The wise and the good will love and praise you, and God Almighty will approve and bless you." "Oh," said she, transported, "now I am again convinced that I have been very foolish, for I never looked in your face without thinking you would be good to the poor girl, and 20 times when you showed me so much kindness I was tempted to lead you to her." We now settled the business. Nancy joyfully committed her protégée to my future cares, and promised to eat her dinner. In the cool of the evening we returned to the cottage. The mother of the girl was at home, and I learned from her that extreme poverty forced her to leave her child. She said the neighbours were few and remote, and that since the smallpox had been in her house no one came near it, nor could she prevail on any one to take care of the girl during her absence, that on leaving her for the day she fed her, and thinking the air was good for her left her at the door, as she was able, in case of need, to crawl on her hands and knees to shelter. "But, madam," added the woman, "she has, I'm told, worms, for she's always craving for food." Good and plentiful nourishment soon removed the good woman's fears relative to the worms. Clean and warm clothing renovated her feeble frame. She recovered her sight, and I left her as a boarder with an honest old woman who taught reading, spinning, and knitting, and who, notwithstanding the lame hand, which was thought to be past relief, also engaged to teach her to knit. My mother became a sharer in our secret, and the principal agent in all these designs. Nancy was not even suspected, and I escaped all questions. On our return to town, my mother failed not to communicate to her friend Mrs. Rebecca Johnson this anecdote of her niece, with such traits of her character as had much pleased and interested her. She by no means spared the mother of this engaging creature, for in my mother's judgment few errors merited more reprehension or severity. Mrs. Seymour, by her neglect, not to say dislike, of this innocent and unoffending child, had no advocate in a breast in which the hardest and most pressing duties of a mother were constantly regarded as the inlets of delight. Mrs. Johnson entered with the most lively interest into the detail. She said that she had for many years of her life considered Mr. Seymour as a son, and that she had looked forward to him as the prop of her declining days. His character and conduct, pursued she, warranted these hopes until I opposed his union with a woman undeserving of him. He knew that I had neither interest nor prejudice for my government, and he was displeased that I had not for his choice the same complaisance to which his own reason submitted. The convictions it has since forced upon him have insensibly operated still more to remove us from each other. He retired into the country, and there buried his distinguished talents and his chagrin. But I know the excellence of his nature, and I pity him. I am sure that he suffers more from being the witness of the injustice you have observed than even from the levity which disgraces him in his own eyes as a husband. It shall be his own fault if he be not relieved from this sorrow at least. I will be the mother of this unfortunate child. I will love her, as I have loved and still do love her unhappy father, who must remain an example of that misery which a blind and self-willed passion can produce. This girl is the eldest of 3 children. The 2 boys are, I am told, very beautiful. Of course they will enjoy the favour of their foolish mother till my nephew provides for their safety by removing them out of her hands, and his daughter shall have no claims on that fortune which is so amply adequate to their education and future establishment. Mrs. Johnson immediately made her proposals, and the nephew with joy met a reconciliation so consonant to his interest and wishes. He acceded with gratitude to her generous conditions, and Mrs. Seymour did not even affect a regret, which as a parent she ought to have blushed not to have felt. She said the aunt and the niece would keep each other in countenance, for they were perfect resemblances. Mrs. Johnson's London friends entirely agreed in respect to the precision of Mrs. Seymour's judgment on this point. It had not occurred to my mother or myself till health had animated Nancy's features. Be it as it might, certain it is, no compliment was more acceptable to the good aunt than remarking this likeness. When my favourite had nearly reached her 16th year, her person was considerably improved, her shape having been till then defective. I remarked one day to the aunt this visible and advantageous alteration, and prognosticated that she would after all turn out a pleasing person. "No," answered Mrs. Johnson, "she will neither be handsome nor genteel, for she will want height and complexion. But nevertheless she will please, my dear Mrs. Palmerston, even to satisfy your partial hopes. The endowments of her heart and mind will make her irresistible with those who stop not at the surface. I shall not, it is probable, live to see her married, but remember what I now predict to you. If Nancy Seymour ever be so fortunate as to attract the notice and esteem of a man of sense and merit, he will be her captive for life. She will be overlooked in a crowd, she will be disregarded by fools, but let merit and worth beware, they will with difficulty escape her. Her train of admirers will be friends, and friends for life." 2 or 3 years before Mrs. Johnson's death, Mr. Beaumont became intimate in the family. He is 8 or 10 years older than my friend. His penetrative eye soon discovered the gem in the unadorned casket. He saw its mild emanations in the artless and playful imagination of ingenuous youth. He saw it shine in uniform sweetness of disposition and in undisguised frankness and candour. He saw it beam in full splendour at the side of Mrs. Johnson's sick couch, which for months the niece attended and converted to that of repose and triumph. Mrs. Johnson had the happiness to see her beloved pupil the wife of Mr. Beaumont 6 or 8 months before she died, and from the day she bestowed this blessing upon him appeared to have no wish ungratified. Her donation to her niece was as unlimited as her affection. She gave her all her fortune. Some time since my friend was indisposed. As I perceived no cause for alarm, and every reason to hope she would soon recover, I was qualified for the comforter of her terrified husband. In one of my daily visits I found him in his wife's dressing-room, under the greatest depression of spirits. He told me with tears that Mrs. Beaumont was worse than I suspected, that she had fainted the evening before, and that he had prevailed upon her not to quit her bed. "You will see her," continued he, "and let me know the worst. I must not be deceived." I entered the bedchamber of my friend with some alarm. "Oh," cries she, "you are come! I rejoice to see you. Do you know that I am under solitary confinement, and that if I had resisted, Beaumont would have ordered the strait waistcoat? I talked and rattled so much last night that with the heat of the apartment, which they had contrived to make as close as an oven, I became faint, and retired hither to recover myself. This the change of air effected instantly, and I returned to my post on the sofa, in hopes of having eluded the vigilance of my keeper. But simpleton as I was, I fainted again like a tragedy heroine, and only found myself out when in my bed, in which he implores me to remain, as though my life depended on my compliance. Go and make him more reasonable, for I really find myself well." As she did not impose either on herself or me, I acquiesced in her desire to rise, and leaving her for that purpose, returned to gladden the desponding husband, who, trusting to my judgment of a change of room being salutary for the invalid, and satisfied that his fears had been premature, resumed his usual cheerfulness. I now rallied him, and laughing, said I should begin to fancy he was under the influence of a particular degree of fate, for that I had heard his extreme attachment to his wife predicted, even before he had seen her. I finished by repeating to him Mrs. Johnson's words, and the conversation which had introduced them. Mr. Beaumont eagerly pursued the pleasing subject, until interrupted by the entrance of his wife, who with much pleasantry upbraided him with his despotism. He fondly repeated what I had been saying, adding, his stars were more in fault than he. She smiled, and turning to me with her bewitching grace, said with assumed gravity, "Was this well done, Angelica? The ignorant are happy still, says some author who had nothing better to say. But is it well done to show the captive those chains from which death only can relieve him? Since, however, he is informed of his wretched doom, I will let him into all the secret. He shall see the spells and incantations which have rendered me an agent in the deep and dark designs of fate." She disappeared, and in a few moments returned with the identical straw bonnet she wore at Matlock, and which was not embellished by time. The air of solemnity she assumed, as I conceived, for her own whimsical purpose, and the white wrapping gown she wore, perfectly suited the metamorphosis, and Mr. Beaumont and myself laughed heartily at her droll appearance. "This talisman," said she to her husband, taking it from her head, "was known by my revered aunt, but it was not her gift. It was furnished by the severe commands of harsh authority, who imposed it on me with other burdens. Virtue saw me sinking under their oppressive weight. She lightened them. She taught me to convert this mark of cold indifference into a memorial of gratitude, and into an incitement to goodness. She called around her attendant graces, and bade me admire real loveliness and beauty, and then, breathing on that bonnet, commanded me to read the talisman within, and placing it on my head, bade me rule all hearts." "Read," said she to her husband, who held it. He obeyed, and read aloud, "You are more lovely and more beautiful in your work of mercy than the most finished form or fairest face could make you. The wise and the good will praise and love you, and God Almighty will approve and bless you." "I have," pursued she, "religiously preserved this favour of my tutelary angel. She has not deceived me, for truth resides with her. The good and the wise," added she with emotion, her eyes swimming in tears, "do praise and cherish me, and my gracious Creator has blessed me in the first connections of human felicity as a social being. He has given to me the heart of my husband, and a sure guide for my journey through life. He has given me a friend, from whose example I have endeavoured to merit this most precious of his gifts." She took my hand. "Why do you blush, Angelica?" said she with renewed gaiety. "This poor man is now to be fully undeceived. You may perceive he sees nothing but magic in all this business. But look at that portrait," presenting to her husband my picture in miniature. "There is the sorceress, and these are the places of her incantations," unrolling some beautiful drawings in water-colours of the cottage scene, our interview at the temple, and several other landscapes in which we had had our share. I was confused, and threatened to send her to her late confinement again. She laughed at my threats, but bade me take courage, for that she would tell her husband the whole story at her own time, and in her own way. "And that," added she, "is not now, for you would spoil it." I found that her last summer's ramble to Matlock was expressly taken to have views of those particular spots which had been impressed on her susceptible heart. She informed me that our poor girl held the high office of school-dame to a score of chubby-faced boys and girls. "But," added she, "I have not been well used there. My rights, if they have not been invaded, have been interfered with." For the grateful creature told me she had always divided with her father and mother the occasional £20 which I sent, as she supposed I intended, for that the £10 per annum regularly remitted to her was sufficient to supply all her wants. But the sorceress," looking at me, "must account for those extraordinary donations. However," continued she, "I am placable, and as a proof of it, tell Eliza that I will lend her my bonnet whenever she wants it, and these drawings to copy whenever she pleases. I know not, my dear Eliza, precisely what may be your application of this subject. You are undoubtedly a very pretty girl. Nay, more, if it please you, I will call you a very beautiful one. You will soon hear this simple and unimportant truth conveyed to you, with all the exaggerations of folly, deceit, and senseless gallantry. If your ambition will be satisfied by a distinction so incidental, and which is liable to numberless mortifications and sinister accidents, your glass will ensure to you, and I will confirm its decision, the triumphs of beauty. You will attract notice and excite envy by the lustre of your eyes and the dazzling whiteness of your skin, but I can hardly prevail on myself, even for a moment, to suspect that the understanding of my child will be contented with a pre-eminence raised on such a slight and weak foundation. I think it would disdain so poor a praise, and nobly assert its claims to a better and a more permanent one. Nor should I be surprised that you entered into the spirit of a very beautiful young woman whom I formerly knew. She had been teased with the silly jargon of offensive praise the greater part of the evening by a young man who imagined he was effectually making his court to her. At length, weary of his assiduities and fulsome compliments, she said with arch humility, "You have, sir, been very condescending in remarking with such elaborate praise my face and shape. You have certainly given to them a value they had not before. I wish you to know all the advantages which I owe to nature, in order that you may also teach me to appreciate them properly." The beau protested that in such a blaze of beauty it was not possible to discriminate, but begged to hear what had escaped him. "Why," replied she, "you might have seen that I had an excellent appetite at dinner, and I do assure you that I walk daily without fatigue 5 or 6 miles, and sleep soundly every night." The gentleman was silenced, and 6 months after I heard him criticise with merciless severity this young lady's face and shape. Refuse, then, this silly bait, whether it be the offering of self-love or that of the world. Aim at something more worthy of you, and in the meantime cultivate those graces of the heart and the mind which will flourish in old age, which will dignify exterior deformity, and shelter sickness and disease from disgust and neglect. Be lovely, be beautiful, but be so in all the wisdom of holiness, and in that purity of heart which faileth not in this life, nor in that which is to come. Yours ever, Angelica Palmerston. End of chapter 4.